Congratulations! You have found another meta egg. That is a metaphysical Easter egg. This might be your first one. You might be coming to us from Thomas here, from Paranoid Americans channel. And you might not know how me and Thomas know each other. We go all the way back to Think Tank. Think Tank is a show that's on Zertus YouTube channel. It's XIRTUS YouTube channel. And every Tuesday, they have a show called Think Tank, where a bunch of synchro mystics get together and talk about movies. Today, I have asked Thomas to come over here and visit me on this channel, and I went over there and visited him on Paranoid America. And so I want all of you guys to welcome him. Thomas, thanks for joining us.
I feel welcome. Thank you, man. Then I just gotta say, this is way long overdue for how long we've been talking about a variety of. It almost feels like we just started to cut out the first pieces of like a massive amount of work that you and I can do together.
Hopefully there's plenty much more to come, but really and truly, these videos are kind of like not titled correctly because it's a movie walkthrough, but there's only like 1 hour that we're spending, and there's no way we could get through an entire movie like that. So we're kind of only like touching it a little bit. And the movie that we're going to watch today is 3,000 Miles to Graceland, which Thomas picked himself. Thomas, why?
Why? It feels like such an underrepresented movie. First of all, it's got an absolute star-studded cast, but like all of the credentials aside, it's kind of seen as a schlock movie. It's kind of seen as like a weird throwaway, but it's such an original premise. And also, I think I'm the most drawn to it because I am obsessively American in that American religions, American culture, American politics. If it's got the word American in front of it, then I'm automatically interested in it. Various reasons as to why, like pros and cons. But as close as America had to royalty, I kind of see Elvis as in this step, or at least he has already claimed like a mythological status. If you looked at America as like a mythology or a pantheon, he definitely has a chair somewhere. I'm not saying he's Zeus, but he's definitely in the pantheon. He's on Mount Olympus somewhere, gyrating his hips, right? And and just to cut off at the pass all the claims like, well, Elvis was really just reappropriating sort of West African culture. Yeah, there's nothing more American than appropriating other people's cultures and making it acceptable to like the American masses, which kind of acts as this big filter. But I think Elvis is one of the absolute best examples of that. And this movie is just about like 5+ Elvises. Technically, there's like over 20 Elvises in the movie itself, but add to like an Elvis to actor ratio, this movie actually has more Elvis than an Elvis movie does. So for that reason, and Kevin Costner and Christian Slater and all the other, David Arquette is in the Courteney Cox. So it has, again, it has a literal pantheon of American gods.
I mean, like it is a piece of like the movie itself is kind of like a piece of Americana because it's dealing with Elvis, but it's also dealing with like this road trip across America, and like nothing's more American than highways. But also like the actors themselves are kind of like the American everyman in a way. You have like Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner, and then you have like what's his face, Kurt Russell, who is another kind of
really
like
the protagonist in this movie. He's like the main character.
Well, go ahead and kind of give us a breakdown of what the movie's about. Like, can you summarize?
Yeah, I mean, the shortest possible summary would be that a bunch of ex-convicts get together and they decide they're going to go to Vegas and do essentially like a casino heist. And the way that they're going to do this is they're going to use the Shroud of Chaos from a Elvis Lives Elvis convention taking over. So if they all dress up as Elvis and then infiltrate a casino that's also filled with other impersonating Elvises, that somehow they can like get by all of the security cameras and everything. And they use just the chaos of these moments, which they do. And then Howie Long of NFL sort of fame comes and rescues them at the top of this casino after they rip it off. Through this, one of the guys dies. This causes a whole bunch of inner turmoil that essentially leads to everyone else dying off except for Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner, who are these two main sort of Elvis figures. And then they kind of battle it out over who gets the final win, and the good guy wins. Spoiler alert, as they usually do. And I guess Kurt Russell in this case, relatively being the good guy. He's still an ex-con. He's still a criminal that shot at innocent people and stole their money, but he's like the good version of all that. And then he sets off into the sunset with Courteney Cox at his side. That is like the most basic breakdown, IMDb synopsis version of this movie. And then there's one other little caveat that I think makes this movie way deeper than it might be in the surface. That's you find out that Kevin Costner is likely a real blood relative of Elvis. And it takes on this, in my opinion, a fascinating, well, he's trying to prove it. He's looking at papers. He's trying to do like genealogy research because Elvis traveled all around the country, goes on all these tours, he's shacking up with a bunch of ladies. So the premise is that he's got a bunch of bastard children unclaimed that have like Elvis's blood running in him. So in my mind, this turns into a Elvis version of Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Like they're looking for the golden chalice of Elvis's blood. And that kind of is the real inspiration, because you notice in this movie, Kevin Costner is not just a guy dressing up as Elvis. Like he has completely personified Elvis to the fact where David Arquette is making a joke about how Frank Sinatra would beat up Elvis, and he like stops the car and he almost blows a straight up gasket on David Arquette. Like David Arquette might have lost his life over just implying that Frank Sinatra could beat up Elvis. So he takes it way beyond just dressing up as Elvis for a heist.
Oh, that's right. There's this whole other aspect of like, is he the real kid of Elvis?
And in my mind, even though the movie doesn't put this out there, I almost assume that everyone in that car could potentially be a real bloodline of Elvis, which adds one extra layer of incentive for why Kevin Costner maybe wants to take the rest of them out, so that he can kind of kill all of his brethren and be like one of the remaining few like actual holy grails of his blood.
Let's see. Kevin Costner, Kurt Russell, Courteney Cox, Christian Slater. I feel like that's important. Is he dress up as Elvis too?
Yeah, Christian Slater is another one of the Elvis impersonators. And is this a sync that Christian Slater, I believe, was also, I want to say Little John in the Robin Hood movie?
No, William Scarlett. He's Will Scarlett. He's Kevin Costner's brother. But it brings up like the same like lineage thing that you were talking about, like Kevin Costner being Elvis's kid, because that's basically what happens in Robin Hood. Like they figure out that they're brothers, and he's like, mom loved you more, because he's like the bastard kid. Christian Slater was like the illegitimate son of Kevin Costner's parents, or Robin Hood's parents. And that's interesting. But there's also, have you ever heard of True Romance? Have you ever seen the movie True Romance?
Oh, of course. Yeah, this is a classic.
Well, I mean, that's like that's the whole thing, right? Is Christian Slater, or he runs around with like the Elvis glasses. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I never put two and two together that there was an Elvis reference in True Romance.
There's a ton. He talks to Elvis every time he goes to the bathroom. That particular, I think, isn't it? Yeah, he wears like the Elvis glasses, doesn't he? Do I remember this wrong? Oh, we're gonna get to the bottom of this.
Well, that's crazy too, because I believe Kurt Russell played Elvis in another movie as well, and that there were there's so many synchronicities, I guess, in this movie between its actors and the actors playing Elvis, and the actors having the same role in this movie that they've had in other movies. Like another one that you brought, I don't want to just like jump right to like the best parts, but I guess that's kind of what we got to do, is that there's even a scene in this movie that after they get all the money from the casino, they have to go and launder it. And they go and launder it, and John Lovitz, another awesome sort of name from this time period, John Lovitz is the guy that's going to help them launder their money. He's kind of like a fence. And Kevin Costner gets into like a little bit of a scuffle with him, and he shoots an arrow. And you've got a screenshot of him pointing this arrow at John Lovitz dressed up as kind of Elvis in a casual day. And then it looks almost identical in posture, as I guess it would if you're shooting a bow and arrow. I guess you got to keep the same posture. But as him as Robin Hood in that movie. So there's so many different connections between this movie and some of my other favorite movies.
Yeah, and True Romance is this. I always said if I had to fuck a guy, I mean I had to, and my life depended on it, I'd blank Elvis. Is a quote from True Romance.
I like how you only blanked the second one of
Right,
those.
sorry. But there's something else, like, see, he wears the Elvis glasses, but he talks to Elvis every time he goes in the bathroom. And Elvis in that one is played by Val Kilmer, although I don't think he's credited. And you never get to see him. He's always blurred out in True Romance. But
God, I
there's this
forgot all
whole
about
weird
that
thing.
subplot.
Was everybody that's involved with, like, again, maybe we're just talking about Americana here. That might be just what the whole thing is, because, like, both of those characters, Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner, play like Wyatt Earp, right? Like Kurt plays it in Tombstone, and then Costner plays it in the other thing, like the Wyatt Earp movie that came out like at the same time, right?
Right, yeah. This I didn't even put that one together either. These guys have these intersecting like timelines on a number of levels.
Right, and then with Kevin Costner's brother is using Doc Holliday from fucking Tombstone as his Elvis. Like everybody's Elvis in this weird way.
I think this is also kind of seen as an honor. Like anyone that actor, in terms of actors, if you actually get cast as Elvis in a miniseries or as a movie, there's like an honor that goes along with that, because again, he is sort of an actual people's monarch, right? Like he was probably more voted into his position by the real populace compared to any other power figure that we've ever really had.
He's the real king. I mean, that's what they called him, the king, right? Like, and in a way, he is like made the king by everyone. Like,
Right.
it's a unanimous decision.
Before American Idol was around, that was kind of the American Idol, was how many people will show up to your shows. And so many, I mean, the Beatles, like I could never really get behind them, because that's just being imported from this Crowleyan European, like pagan rites. But, you know, at least Elvis, even if he represents some of that same stuff, even look at his outfits, right? He had like an Aztec outfit. He had American Eagle outfits.
Yeah.
He had all sorts of like Native American inspired outfits. So even the mythology that he came to represent, even if it were a cult, it was like Native American, Central American occult. Like he was, again, he really, really embodied all forms of America. I'm not just talking about United States of America, North America, South America, Central America. He was like the king of that entire region.
All right. No, you're making good points. And I mean, one of those, I guess, would be a cool thing to show is like some of the costumes that he wore. That you,
and there's a lot, man. I had to go through. There's websites that index all the different phases of Elvis from, I think, like 1969 through like the mid 70s, and you can see that there's a progress. It almost looks like a bell curve, to be honest, in the amount of like sequins and the amount of symbolism. It sort of peaks around the early 1970s, and that's where you get the most iconic Elvis outfits.
And then this goes into the movie, but you said that you actually like went through and found some information about the suits and whatnot.
Yeah,
have you ever been to Graceland?
Have I ever been where?
Graceland.
No, I've never been to Graceland. I've been to Vegas, and I've seen Elvis impersonators in Vegas, but I've never been to Graceland.
Well, there's a room in Graceland where they just have like these glass cases, and it's nothing but the suits. Like he had a new suit like made for every special and stuff. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of those bell-bottom jumpsuits.
Yeah, so I did put together an image that had a single shot in the movie with all of the different main characters that we see, all 5 of them, and they're sort of dressed up in very unique, different Elvis outfits. And one of them is called the Blue Swirl. There's another one called the White Fireworks. There's one called the Black Matador. There's a Red Pinwheel. And then I guess one of the other interesting ones is called the Black Cisco Kid, which the the color pattern is actually an inversion. Yeah, this is the image I'm talking about. So all the way on the left, you've got the blue swirl version. This one has like the little wing flaps, although you don't see them the way David Arquette is wearing it right now. And then there's a white fireworks, which you see Kurt Russell wearing. You got the black matador, which is sort of Kevin Costner in the middle. I think that's kind of like the dark. That's the shadow Elvis. You can see even in the color symbolism, right? Kurt Douglas is like the good Elvis because it's white and light blue, and then you've got this gold and black. Then you've got the red pinwheel, Christian Slater. Again, typically he comes to a tragic end, or he represents tragedy in almost every single movie that he's ever been in, and even like TV shows. He represents tragedy, in my opinion. He very rarely is he the stereotypical hero that everything works out. He's no Candide, right? And then on the far
True
right,
Romance is a good example of that. But yeah,
well, and even Robin Hood, right? Even in Robin Hood, he can't get over like this weird sort of obsession or jealousy of his brother, and it like leads him down and then you've got Black Cisco Kid. And man, this is actually sort of unique in that there are not a lot of yellow Elvis outfits. He had a gold outfit, but a lot of the yellow doesn't show up except for this one outfit called Black Cisco Kid, but it's actually an inversion. In the Elvis version, the suit itself is black, and then he wears sort of a huge yellow scarf. And then in the movie, his entire outfit is yellow, and then it just kind of has a black sort of shorter piece and like a black cape to it. But that is the only one, and that's, of course, it's the black guy that's wearing the inverted Black Cisco Kid. So there's just like a triple inversion there, right? Because the actual name of it was the Black Cisco Kid. So this was Elvis's version of a Black Cisco Kid, and then a black guy impersonating him. So I thought that it was interesting that they even took enough time in this movie to make sure that the main characters wore real representations of actual Elvis outfits. Because, for example, there was a point when they're at the casino at this convention, and a guy runs up to Kevin Costner that recognizes him from his criminal life, and Kevin Costner pretends not to know him, and he kind of pushes him away, and he eventually like knocks him down. And that guy was wearing roller skates, but he was also wearing like a purple Elvis outfit, and it didn't look like him or any of the other impersonators in this movie lined up with actual Elvis outfits. So these 5 characters are the only ones that are even bestowed with like the honor of wearing an actual reproduction of an Elvis outfit.
It's funny that you mentioned the suits kind of lining up to the good guy, bad guy, because that symbolism is used the whole time with scorpions in this movie.
Yeah, the movie starts out with some somewhat dated CGI, but it's got a white scorpion versus a black scorpion. The black scorpion wins, I believe, in this face-off, actually. But it ends with the kid grabbing the black scorpion that had just won this fight and stuffing it into a bottle. And then you learn that this kid is Jesse James. So I also, aside from the synchronicities of the characters and their roles in other movies, I was kind of going on this theme that maybe Elvis in this case represents Kronos or Saturn, and that this kid, he's the one that is essentially going to kill the king. This is the king kill ritual, but the kid is the one that represents this. And we later find out that his name is Jesse James, who is also named after sort of a killer, right? Like this young baby face killer. So that was one of the other threads I was watching this through.
Like an American hero. I mean, all of these are kind of like, it's all, I don't know, man. I'm kind of getting a little bit suspicious. Like the people who are involved with 3,000 miles to Graceland seems intentional to me almost.
Well, and another unique part of this movie is it will transport you back to the late 90s, early 2000s, not just the soundtrack, but the cinematography itself. There's a lot of times when it jumps in and out of being a music video. And that makes sense when you find out that the director of this movie, his biggest accolades prior to the making this movie, and even afterwards, like some of his biggest accolades are that he did a lot of music videos. In fact, he did Eric B. and Rakim's Don't Sweat the Technique music video. Yeah, right. And just the editing styles and the CGI effects and all, like some of the little clips that they use, it makes so much more sense when you realize that this movie was brought to us through the vision of music video. And I think that maybe even for me, the 80s and 90s music videos were sort of my first look into abstract visual media, right? I wasn't going to a whole lot of like museums and seeing like weird experimental art, but I was definitely watching MTV and VH1 and everything else. So this was like my first sort of introduction to symbolism and like mysticism was probably through music videos, which again is why this one that maybe it opens up like a old wound in my 13 or 14-year-old head, so that 3,000 miles to Graceland can like penetrate my skull easier.
All right. So what happens next with Jesse James and his relationship to Kurt Russell?
Well, he ends up stealing money from Kurt Russell. So he's the kid of Courteney Cox, which I think is probably bearing the lead a little bit. So the whole movie starts out, Kurt Russell, presumably he just got out of jail. He comes into this tiny little town called Rosewood that says population of 63, which I think wouldn't even warrant a sign that would have that number, right? One person dies or is born, you got to change the whole sign if it's that low, right? He pulls into this small little town. And he needs to go and get gas. And while he's getting gas, this little kid, Jesse James, is stealing some chromies off of his tires. Also a very 90s thing to do, by the way. I don't know what kind of crew you ran with.
Nobody does that anymore.
A lot of the crews, that was their thing. But in particular, he's stealing these little skull chromies. He's stealing the skull, or he's taking the head of Kronos in this way. He's this little... Anyways, maybe I'm getting too far ahead of myself. But you got this little kid that is taking the chromies, and that's kind of what leads to the interaction where he's chasing the kid because he realizes he took his chromies, bumps into Courteney Cox, and is like, hey, your kid took these from me. She gets them back, and then they immediately bang because, of course, you've got the protagonist and the leading actress, but also some interesting things about her, right? The fact that there's these like she kind of represents scorpions and a child, and the first thing I thought of was this is kind of the origin story of Isis, where Isis comes out of a swamp and she's carrying this kid and she's surrounded by these 7 scorpions. And long story short, she goes through some struggles, and the 7 scorpions combine into one scorpion, one single big black scorpion, by stinging each other. Like, so 6 of the scorpions essentially transfer all their venom into this one, and that one becomes almost like a mercenary for Isis. I'm simplifying some of this, and then that scorpion can attack somebody, and she has the ability to talk to the venom and be like, hey, come back out of there, don't do this. So the antidote becomes like a magical incantation or spell, and you kind of see this reflect a little bit in this movie, where every time Jesse James does something, if he steals the head of Kurt Russell, if he steals money from him, she just says something, and it kind of undoes whatever that negative effect was. She says, Jesse, go get the money, or Jesse, give this man his stuff back. Jesse, give this man his life back, his head, right? His chromies, I guess, in this example. So that one kind of like stood out to me. But she also wears like a tight red string around her neck with a little bell on it. Every single scene in this entire movie, she's got a little bell around her neck, which it led into all these different little tangents. But that felt like such a specific accessory that it went with every single outfit that we see her in. I wasn't able to fully decode what I was actually opening. You might even have any thoughts on what the hell that bell meant.
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was like her husband's in this movie. Her husband's one of the other Elvises. David Arquette, right?
Oh, in real life husband. Right. That's right.
Right.
Was it at this time?
Yeah, because right here, this says David Arquette and Courteney Cox were married from 1999 to 2013. So they had only been married for a few years by the time that both of them are in this movie together.
And he gets killed early on. I guess all of the Elvises except for Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner are killed by like the halfway point.
And basically it's the story of those two, right? One's a good guy and one's a bad guy.
Right. So Kurt Russell's the one that runs into Courteney Cox. That's how we get introduced to this whole like Scorpion and Isis, Jesse James plot line. And then we just see that the premise is that in jail, Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell, they agreed that they were going to do this Elvis heist along with the other crew that they got. So this is them coming together because they're all finally out of jail at the same time, and they pull off this big heist. One of the things that goes wrong is during the heist, the black Cisco kid, he gets shot. I think he gets shot in the head. And they're in this elevator. They go up, and then as they get into this helicopter at the top of the casino, they're getting flown away by Howie Long. We see that the guy is basically not going to make it. Like it was, and they have an argument over whether they should stop and bring him to the hospital. And eventually, he just gets pushed out of the helicopter. So the conversation is over at that point. But then the flare up, and this I guess is the crux of where the movie sort of like splits, is that everyone assumes that the dead guy, they're just going to split his earnings, his take from this heist equally. And Kevin Costner's no, it's not like that. We had an agreement, and we're going to live this agreement down to the letter, meaning you're only going to get how much you originally agreed upon. And that is what causes Christian Slater and everyone else essentially to start revolting against Kevin Costner. Although Kurt Russell, which I guess is, if we say Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner are like the good and bad, right? The shadow and the light. He's kind of telling everyone like, hey, don't even fight this. Like the shadow is going to have like his ultimate say in the matter. So just let him do whatever he wants and just accept it. And no one else can really come to those sort of terms. So they get off as well. There's sort of a final showdown. And again, Kurt Russell ends up making out with all the money, with the girl, with Jesse James, and they kind of like ride off into the sunset. And then you kind of find out around that same time that Kevin Costner might actually have been related to Elvis, but it's sort of a weird, like very vague subplot like resolution. But I think that was really the crux of the whole movie. The whole movie was about how serious these people were taking the quest for like this holy grail proof.
Okay, so this is what you were talking about not too long ago when I sent you the this is October 6th, 2010. This is my old, I used to run a blog called Few Shots to Shaman. And we also, with Jake Kotz and a whole bunch of other people, ran a thing called the Sinkhole. And this is a header for the, get that out of here. The header for the hole, or the sinkhole, in case anyone is interested, was the tag, something like hitting the mark. I think hitting the mark is a phrase that could mean anything from not shining or not sinning, seeing that some people refer to sin in that matter, to hitting a proverbial target pertaining to sink and haps. I'm talking about synchromysticism. The hole was has a long history of Robin Hood sinks. And in fact, back at that time, each of us had different names that were correlating to Robin Hood characters. And we always thought about sinks as like, if you got a good sink, you like hit the target. And so then, and further on, I say, Kevin Costner immediately would have had some archery skill, I imagine, post Robin Hood. I have to consider the fact that the scene next to Robin Hood above from 3,000 miles to Graceland was not a very long scene at all, which is not. It only happens like real quick. They don't make a big issue out of him using that bow. But for a while there, I considered maybe he was using the bow because of Robin Hood, but it's just a weird detail of him killing people with a bow and arrow.
No, I think that's an incredible sync. I mean, this is on par with when you were on my show, you brought up the sync with like Rose McGowan and car crashes.
Oh, yeah.
This one, it feels just as relevant. I wonder how many other people have watched all the Kevin Costner movies looking for this sort of archer symbolism. Like this can't be the start and end of it. It's just at Robin Hood and 3,000 Miles to Graceland randomly.
Well, then Christian Slater's in the same movie. Both of them are in Robin Hood and both in this one. So the fact that both of them are kind of like carrying on that idea is weird.
If I had to bet money, if we were actually in Vegas at a Elvis convention, I would bet money that they probably baked this into the movie because of that connection. Just because like certain jokes write themselves, and like I would say like certain synchronistic synchronicities write themselves as well.
Okay, yeah. I think that's good. Because it's funny, like sometimes we'll come up with ideas like when remember when David Bowie died and it was like David Bowie and then the guy who plays Snape in Harry Potter. They died at like the same time, and then people had made the correlation of David Bowie's lightning bolt being the same as like Harry Potter's lightning bolt. That was like a big sync thing. Like all of these sync heads were coming up with
Right,
this.
their death had like a quantum entanglement over a lightning strike.
Right, exactly. But when I went to Comic-Con, you can see my Comic-Con shit back behind me. When I went to Comic-Con, there was like things that people have made that had like included Snape and David Bowie and Harry Potter together. Like it wasn't just the sync heads that got it. Like it's kind of an obvious like trope. It stuff kind of is automatically like related. I was going to say also there's a thing with Sagittarius. You know Sagittarius, right? In the night sky.
Right, Sagittarius, also the archer, also sometimes I think associated with like Artemis too.
Oh yeah, well the Artemis will come into play too because of all of the peacocks. But because all of the Elvis peacock stuff, Sagittarius points towards the tail of the scorpion. Like because all of their points point to galactic center, Sagittarius and Scorpion are like in the same area. It's kind of weird.
That is kind of because now you've got the same bow and arrow scorpion symbolism that's clearly in this movie, like without even having to squint in your eyes or anything.
Yeah, clearly. All the way down to shoddy CGI. They wanted the scorpions in this video.
Yeah, the amount of time and resources that were spent on this scorpion battle at the beginning, especially during the time period, this was not just like a thought someone had in the shower one day. It was like, let's take a look and see what that looks like. This probably was a significant portion of the budget, aside from all of the huge names they got on it. And another thing too, they're just weird about this movie. This movie is an absolute anomaly in the amount of huge profile names that it had in it and the wide release that it got compared to every other movie that this director has come out with. Every other movie are basically like straight to video, like things that you might catch on USA at like really late night or something, but almost none of his other movies got any sort of traction. This one truly stands out. Like it is an absolute anomaly for this movie to even exist.
Yeah, I'm looking at it on DMB or on Wikipedia right now. Like, none of these people even have Wikipedia pages. The director, which is named Demian Lichtenstein.
Yeah, I'm following him on social. He only had like 1,000 followers or something. So I hope that I would need to get a response on what the name means. We got to talk about that too. I was trying to go right to the source, man. I needed to know the answer to this.
Well, let's talk about the name here because the whole premise of 3,000 Miles to Graceland, you've done the math on.
Right. So the distance from Las Vegas to Graceland is actually about 1,400 miles and change. You could say 1,500 miles. So 3,000 miles to Graceland is actually double the distance of the plot in this movie. And then I started looking, well, what locations are actually 3,000 miles to Graceland? And there weren't any that really made any sort of sense. Sounds made up. Well, you actually suggested the only thing that's made any sense so far, and that's that maybe it's either like a round trip, or it might be two different people, both like, for example, maybe Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell all had to make their individual hero journeys to Graceland, or Vegas being a proxy to Graceland, and that like those added up become 3,000 miles. Every single one of those explanations that doesn't make the only one that makes sense is going from Vegas to Graceland and back, or vice versa, Graceland to Vegas and back. Or roughly, you could get about like 3,000 miles.
I like what you said about both because they don't go together, do they? Do Kevin Costner and
they don't go together, but also neither of them necessarily start in Graceland unless you then take Kevin Costner being a blood relative, being the holy grail of Elvis. Then technically he did start in Graceland, and that he was conceived in Graceland. If you also stretch the meaning of Graceland to be anywhere Elvis Presley is at the time, so anywhere he goes around the country and he bangs someone, like you were conceived in Graceland, even if you were in like Salt Lake City, right?
Right. So Graceland goes where Elvis goes.
I mean, I don't even think I'm being cheeky by implying that, right? Like Graceland
It
wouldn't
kind of
exist without Elvis. At least when you say the word out loud, like all of the information that it conjures tends to be related to Elvis. So I would almost say that like Elvis is a roaming Graceland.
no, I mean, I've heard similar things being called to like Israel or whatever. Like, what is the distance? In a way, like Graceland is Elvis's like, because it's just a made up name. It's just a part of Memphis. Like Graceland is what he named his estate. You know what I'm saying? So it really doesn't actually exist. It exists wherever he is. That makes perfect sense.
No, it's almost like the Balfour Declaration, but it's Elvis's version of that.
Wow. Budget was 47.4 million. Box office was 18.7. The SWAT team surrounds the warehouse. Murphy pretends to surround, but grabs a gun and shoots Michael. A gunfight ensues. Murphy refuses to surrender and is killed by police. An ambulance takes Michael for medical care, but is stolen by Sybil and Jesse. Once again, Michael wore a bulletproof vest and was only slightly injured. The three escape together and are sent on Michael's boat, which is named what? Graceland. So it has nothing to do with Graceland. It has to do with this boat.
Is that what it is?
Yes,
3,000 miles to Graceland is the boat.
Graceland is the boat. So
Did you just solve the mystery live? Right?
Holy shit. So it goes wherever he goes. It's exactly what we were saying.
That's hilarious.
Wow.
Yeah, so he I mean, again, if you look at this as a king kill ritual, right? And to
crime is king.
King kill,
it basically says the word king in the movie.
Right. And all king kill ritual is a transference of the actual like energetic power that is personified in a person, and you take them out at their height, at their peak energy, and then if you're the one that takes them out, then you have some say over where that energy ends up, either in you or you can kind of decide where it's going to go to next. So in this case, if Kevin Costner was the actual blood relative of Elvis, and he's kind of like the alpha energy in this movie, by taking him out, you then gain all of his power, including everywhere you go is now Graceland, which sort of is represented by Kurt Russell now on the boat called Graceland. So now wherever he goes, that's where he is.
No, what is this right here? Is this them doing the heist?
Let me see here. Oh, this. So it's hard for me to separate like my critical views of like movies and like the symbolic ones. This was just showing how he overrode the elevator, and somehow like I know what the components are that he's messing with. And all he does is he connects a crystal, usually used for some sort of like timekeeping. He connects a clock crystal to a capacitor, which I don't know of any way in the actual world of electronics this would ever allow you to do what they claim that like overriding this elevator and getting control. You don't connect something to a capacitor. You would connect it to an IC chip. But anyway, that was just me being pedantic on like, oh, they want to show me something technical. I'm going to break it down.
Total movie magic then, huh? That's the elevator.
A lot of it. There was another one too when Howie Long picks them up in the helicopter to get away. The helicopter's actual number was N911VR, which in its own right is a fun one to pick apart. But I just thought
that's the same year though, because this came out in February of 2001. Which means that within a few months is when 9/11 happened.
Right, and which means that they filmed this movie clearly prior to having any knowledge of 9/11. So yeah, the aircraft involved in a tragedy in this movie in which you see a man fall out of the sky on 9/11, like literally he's on 9/11 and he falls out of it. But I just thought, I don't know if this was a weird movie magic just thing or if there was something symbolic worth pointing out, but the getaway helicopter says like it's got the license plate, like every single aircraft has a very readable. So on this helicopter, it says N911VR on its tail. So everyone running out of this casino sees these guys getting into the helicopter. All you'd have to do is look up the FAA's registration for the 9/11 helicopter, which isn't a hard number to remember, and you would know exactly who owns it and where to go. So I don't know. I just thought it was another thing worth pointing out, that their getaway vehicle, they didn't even like cover up their license plate.
Well, it's very interesting because the origins of synchromysticism basically started in weird 9/11 syncs, mostly having to do with helicopters. So
I've never
mostly
heard
having to do with
3,000
helicopters. There was a
miles
bunch
to
of helicopters that were in the air during that time, and some of them were like go through the clouds of smoke and don't come out the other side, or weird stuff like that. So there's this whole idea that there was like time travelers in the helicopters, and or that the helicopters had some sort of equipment that helped the building collapse. That's like a whole nother thing. But those ideas were basically like the first topics in synchromysticism.
Right, so
All 9/11.
we can officially add 3,000 miles to Graceland to the 9/11 conspiracy in terms of synchromysticism.
I would use it. If I was going to make a video where I was highlighting any and all like helicopter weird syncs that had to do with 9/11, I would use Graceland.
Well, there you have it. I think we're breaking ground today on a lot of different fronts.
Well, I mean, one of the very first syncs that somebody ever like brought forth was Escape from New York, when Kurt Russell flies his little glider plane and lands it on the Twin Towers. And they make this whole thing about like the planes hitting the towers and so forth and so on. But that's also like a John Carpenter. Like there's a weird John Carpenter thing going on here too, because Kurt Russell played Elvis in another movie that was done by Carpenter about Elvis. All Carpenter's movies sync in weird ways. It was like there was this weird prophetic thing that had to do with Carpenter, and nobody really knows if John Carpenter, I mean, his name even kind of like is the same initials as Jesus Christ, right? But John Carpenter has like almost like this way of predicting the future, and no one can really tell if it was because he was just that creative or if, you know, he's Illuminati or whatever.
Well, and yeah, again, another Kurt Russell 9/11 connection between this movie and other movies.
Yeah, of course. One of the first syncs is 9/11 with Kurt Russell, and then that would go straight to 3000. Like, and it's on the same year. It's just weird. That's him with Courteney Cox. Well, what is this?
That's a screenshot of the Eric B. and Rakim music video. That is what gave this director all of his accolades.
So this isn't from the movie.
This is not. Well, I mean, I would argue that this is where the DNA of this movie come in, because there's a long drawn out sequence that essentially, if you replace Eric B. right there with Elvis, and they're inside of a casino, this scene basically happens, right? He's got all these Vegas showgirls that are just dancing and shaking their asses constantly throughout this entire like music video scene. So yeah, it's he basically reshoots rap videos and puts it in the middle of this Elvis movie.
That's interesting. I mean, basically, at this time period is where, you know, MTV is kind of leaving the public consciousness. However, a bunch of individuals who have made music videos are becoming movie directors. I guess it didn't pan out for this guy, but
well, this was also around the time of Hype Williams, and then Hype Williams got to make Belly, and so that it seemed as if that trajectory was already being defined. Like that was going to be the pipeline: is you start with music videos and then you end with huge Hollywood movies. I don't think it worked out exactly that way for everybody, but that was the pipe dream, I think, for a lot of music video directors at that point. And that was, yeah, I had one example that this is a real helicopter, and that really is its real call letters. So even in the movie, I mean, I assume in a practical sense, even for the sake of shooting a movie, you're not allowed to cover up the call sign of this particular helicopter. But this is the same one.
The VR at the end makes it seem like it's some sort of simulation or something.
That's,
you know what I mean?
No, it's just another coincidence to add to the list, I guess.
When we have them in the deer scene.
The deer, well, no, it's actually a wolf. He runs and he hits a wolf at a certain point. Kevin Costner does.
Dances with wolves.
Right. He runs over a wolf. You see it like it hit the grill and it rolls off the windshield and it gets all bloody and everything. So I did feel like this was a reference to Robin Hood yet again.
That's
Or sorry,
weird.
his like entire sort of
But
um his
his
trajectory.
metaverse, whatever you
Yeah,
want to
his
call it, like
metaverse. And
his
this
think
and
web.
this right here is one of the Elvis songs called Wolf Call. And Wolf Call is about him stealing all the ladies that are in this club. He's singing and he's dancing, but they're all like leaving their men and coming to him, and it's known as this Wolf Call. And it's weird because all the guys in the movie are like whistling at them like old like Looney Tunes style, like doing these wolf whistles. But yeah, this song, just another Elvis reference to this wolf call.
Dances with Wolves, man.
Right.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. This is the questionnaire. We had a good conversation before this started.
So I think that this was a prison joke. I think it was a very deep prison joke. But at a certain point, this is when John Lovitz had already gotten, basically attacked by Kevin Costner. This is after the Kevin Costner bow and arrow Prince of Thieves scene in 3,000 Miles of Graceland. And then he kind of acts as if he's now the money launderer, John Lovitz. So Courteney Cox comes to him with this money that she gets from Kurt Russell, unbeknownst that, now the dark Elvis is trying to trick the light Elvis. But before he does that, he's filling out this sort of sex survey in like a Cosmopolitan magazine or something. And he circles, do you masturbate always? And then the next question, it says, have you ever wanted to have rough sex with a man? So then if you go to the next one, he circles no, he's never wanted to. But then it says, have you ever had rough sex with a man? And he circles yes. And then Courteney Cox walks in, like she breaks up this scene. But again, these scenes, they didn't just like randomly like, oh, just, circle a few things, just pick up a random magazine. Like this is in the script of him to do all of this. And this shot is planned to happen right before Courteney Cox walks in. So, I mean, I was wondering,
it reminds me of that scene in The Shining where Jack Nicholson is looking at like a playgirl.
At a playgirl, right, in the middle of the scene. Where was that just randomly inserted? Probably not. That was like in the script somewhere, or at least the director was like, hey, before we shoot this, I got a little tweak. So, I mean, on one side, you could see, okay, this is them saying, haha, he was in jail, so he probably got taken advantage of while he was in jail, right? But he almost smirks a little bit after he circles this. It shows his reaction, and it's not like he's
remembering the good old times,
or he's just proud of something that he went through. So again, my first thought, since I knew when I noticed
it could
this,
mean that he was the one who initiated the rough sex. It doesn't necessarily mean that he was penetrated.
right. Which is why he's smiling. But since I knew that on this particular watch through, I knew we were going to talk about it. I was wondering, is this a metaverse? Is this a meta Kevin Costner thing that's going on, and not necessarily a role of him as a ex-convict, Elvis impersonator? Like, is this part of the Kevin Costner metaverse?
Oh, yes. Oh, now we have homework.
Disclosure, right? This is just disclosure. They have to tell you.
Oh, that's the. And then there's another peacock.
This is the yeah. So the peacock is probably my favorite thread in all of this. I guess we saved the best for last a little bit. So not only did Elvis have an official peacock outfit, but I would argue that the whole entire premise of peacocking and the reason why that term exists, which is I guess like a cringe pickup artist NLP kind of term, but peacocking is just being the most extravagant person in the room, trying to attract all the attention as sort of like a power or an alpha move. And I would say you could apply that to every single Elvis outfit, especially if it's got sequins on it. He's literally peacocking the entire room. He's making the attention all his.
Right, and intentionally so. Like he's using the peacock for that purpose. I mean, I've always felt that way about Elvis. I've told you once before too, like there's this group of like gods, peacock angels or feathery serpents or what like that. Like you talked about Argus earlier tonight. They're always usually associated with like virgin goddesses, but there's a lot of like that idea that I kind of transpose over all of the Elvis stuff, including the elven god called Dawson Gloss, which is a total blue faced peacock headdressed deity that a lot of people will associate to Elvis just because his name kind of sounds like an elf.
Well, you mentioned Argus, and Argus, I believe, was known as like the god of 1,000 eyes or something. And the connection to the peacock, this came up when I was doing my very first occult decode of like a movie, like an official decode. And that was when I was doing for the Occult Disney series, and we were breaking down, I believe it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and they show that the evil stepmother, she sits in this huge throne, and the throne has got a peacock at the top, and all
I've
these
seen that.
peacock feathers. And
yeah, and around it is all of like the signs of the zodiac. Like a lot of people have associated Snow White and stuff of that nature to those first Disney movies as being very Rosicrucian.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely of that opinion, highly so. And then it led me down this path too, that the peacock feather itself became representative of the all-seeing eye, because they all have this pattern at the very top. So now you've got, in my opinion, fascinating, like Disney's earliest theatrical release, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, has this all-seeing eye symbolism in tandem with like black magic mirrors, in tandem with the astrological, the zodiac signs, as you just mentioned, all the Rosicrucian symbolism. So the peacock feather has always stood out to me ever since that one decode. And when I was watching this one, and you just notice that Elvis also represents the peacock in so many different ways. So I think the peacock symbolism goes way outside this movie. It's just applied to Elvis as a whole, which I think like the Ouroboros, sort of like the point eating its own tail, is that Elvis is part of mythology. Like he's actually part of a pantheon, the same way that he has like many spirit animals, but you could say the peacock is probably his like main spirit animal.
Right. I think you're dead on. And it's weird too, because like modern businesses, there's a security firm. I don't know. It might be nationwide, but it's definitely in my city that like they watch over concerts or sporting events, but their name is Argus. Because that's the whole like 1,000 eyes everywhere, right? Like the one who protects the virgin goddess. See,
which I guess in this case, is the virgin goddess Courteney Cox. Like clearly she's not a virgin, but I mean she serves as that archetype, which I also think relates to that bell, because the bell around her neck, it used to represent some cultures like being chaste or having fertility, but it was basically like the bell, the shape of the bell would have been like the feminine genitalia, and then either the tongue of the bell that makes it ring, that would sometimes be seen as like the phallic version of that. But there's also iterations where the bell without an actual staff that it's connected to, without the handle, essentially just represents like a feminine virginity, like literally like around the neck that is waiting for Kurt Russell to make it ring.
I think you might be onto something there. We talked about the bell earlier, but I really didn't have anything that I could go off of. It seems to be some sort of like way of ownership or something, like that's what you put on a dog or a cow to make sure that you know where they are at all times, so to speak.
Well, it's also used to ward off evil, like the bell ringing, especially if it were like a maiden with a bell as opposed to an animal. I think even they put bells around the necks of elephants in some culture, and part of it is actually because they can move very silently. So like an elephant really could sneak up on you and cause damage, but the mythology behind it is that it's supposed to ward off evil and bad intent. So this also might be symbolic that because Courteney Cox is wearing this little like evil detector on her, and she represents this perpetual maiden in a way, and Isis, that because she accepts Kurt Russell, that even though he's an ex-convict and even though he's shooting at innocent people and stealing their money, he's still the good guy because he's being accepted by this like goddess essentially. And that's the real indication that he's the good guy versus Kevin Costner. Because really, if you were to remove Courteney Cox from this movie, I can't tell the difference between who's good and bad between Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner. They're both doing the same crimes. It's just that one of them almost seems to live life to the letter of the law, whereas Kurt Russell's more willing to bend with it.
Well, wasn't that a main contention while they were making the film, both between Costner and Russell? Russell wanted it to be a little bit more romantic, and Costner wanted more violence.
Right. Yeah, Kevin Costner wanted this to be a straight up heist movie, and Kurt Russell wanted it to be more of like a rom-com. So they were also having actual conflict with each other during the course of this movie in which they're supposed to be having conflict.
So I looked up spiritual and religious significance of a bell around the neck, and it says in many spiritual and religious contexts, bells are used to mark significant events or to call worshipers. The sound of the bell can symbolize purity, clarity, and transcendence, inviting contemplation on the impermanent nature of life, which I think the movie does pretty good.
Well, again, if you were to focus on Courteney Cox and imagine that the movie revolves around her, she does this exactly. She's the one that attracts Kurt Russell to even just by happenstance to show up at this particular like lodge slash gas station that she's kind of like living out of. And because he runs into this particular spot and her kid steals stuff off of his car, now their paths are linked somehow. And at the very end, she's now rich. She's got a boat. She's chilling with Kurt Russell. Her kid's fine. Like everything works out perfectly for Courteney Cox in this movie, basically to the detriment of every other character.
Kurt Russell is greater than
that
Kevin
one's hard,
Costner.
man. I don't know. I wasn't prepared to make any sort of judgment call in that case. I don't know how I feel about
tough.
that. That's art
No,
right
I mean,
there, man.
Yellowstone is pretty good, man.
That made me feel emotions.
Every time a bell rings, an angel gets a swing. Again, I feel like these guys are the modern day Jimmy Stewarts, and you're referencing what A Wonderful Life, right? So it's like a big piece of American icona.
Her bell rings quite a few times in this movie, so I guess a lot of wings were made.
Ring my bell, ring my bell. All right, so let's compartmentalize here because we got 3,000 miles to Graceland. But if we're gonna do another movie, what do you want to do next?
Clifford with Martin Short.
All right, Bell used to get service or servants.
Correct. I mean, that's kind of what we were saying, right? It's attracting worshipers.
Yeah.
Have you seen Clifford with Martin Short?
I don't think I have.
Oh, you're in for a treat, my friend.
I'm excited.
I am too. It's another movie that I can't imagine anyone did any like sync breakdowns. My mind is blown that you were able to pull up an old blog post where you had already made the connection between Kevin Costner as Robin Hood and his role in 3,000 Miles to Graceland. So all the props to you, man. I'm absolutely.
Well, you got to realize too that I was watching it for sync reasons. Like by the time I think it was like 2008 when I got to Synchro Mysticism, so I had not even seen that movie up until then, and I specifically went looking at it because of who was in it. But it's a weird anomalous movie, bro. So like as soon as you said it, I was like, I'm down. I'm totally down for that. Like some people pick like Hot Tub Time Machine is what somebody else, David, picked that one.
That's
and
a
that
good
one was relevant to the time. I guess Alex Fulton, another video that we did, he picked a Wes Anderson movie, and Wes Anderson makes weird movies. So you could probably analyze those till the cows come home. But like nobody in their right mind is going to say 3,000 miles to Graceland. So when you did, I just cracked a big smile. I was excited.
And I think Clifford makes even less sense, which is why I'm more excited to find out what synchronicities we can find in it. Because I would be again shocked if anyone ever had it under that lens. It's almost seen as like a weird anomaly movie that shouldn't have existed.
Well, I would encourage anyone that is curious about other projects that Thomas has got going on, because Thomas is much more than just a YouTuber. Thomas actually has for lack of a better term, a comic book conglomerate. Like, explain this to people.
Yeah, it started out as one comic book and it turned into like over 60 titles now. But yeah, paranoidamerican.com. But I'm a self-running comic publishing machine at this point. So I take the deepest and darkest research. Like basically the premise of the very first comic series that I came out with, I read a bunch of Fritz Springmeier work, a whole bunch of sort of like Transformation America, like some really dark explicit stuff. Franklin scandal and the Franklin cover-up. I John DeCamp and the later one by Nick Bryant. And I wanted to make that accessible to a wider audience and take some of the edge off. So I figure like turn it into an animation or turn it into a comic book and have some very serious research, but presented outside of the doom and gloom aspect that I guess I'm so used to. And imagine trying to convince a normal person in your life, grandma, right? Trying to get grandma to look into like the Franklin cover up, right? And like Boys
Right.
Town and Lawrence King. It just like, why are you looking into this, Will? Like, this is not something that a healthy boy should be, concerning themselves with. Well, this is a way to make it approachable, and I guess in my way to etch it into the record a little bit. So I was working at Disney at the time, and that was my thought. I literally had a day when I looked to my right and I looked to my left, and I was like, the guy to my right was doing animation on the Lion King movie. The guy on my left was like actively working on Cars. I was like, I would be crazy to not do everything I can at this moment to try and capitalize on the resources that I got around me. Like, what if I can get Disney level professionals working on Project Monarch conspiracy theory animations and comics? So that's where it was born, and that was over 12 years ago, and it's still going strong today.
So everybody who's interested, please go look into Thomas's kingdom, his Graceland. Thomas is Graceland of comic books.
Everywhere I go, yeah, that's Graceland.
I think we figured it out, bro. I think it's the boat.
I think so too, man. That it makes way more sense than any other theory that we were coming up with.
Wow. All right. For those who are familiar with Meta Egg, thank you for your support. For those who aren't, Thomas wants you to go and subscribe right now.
Definitely. You just click it. You just a button that's like right there. You just click it once and you're done.
And we'll have a bunch more stuff coming out with Thomas, including Clifford here soon. There's other stuff that you can go back and watch, some modern stuff, some older things, and there's a whole bunch of cartoons. We'll go back and look at how cartoons mimic conspiracy theories like Montauk, and it's just a lot of fun. You guys, thank you so much for participating in the chat group. And guys, I can't wait to see you again. Thanks, Thomas, man. It's been a bunch of fun.
Likewise, man. See you.